Hello, this is Lucas Richman, music director for the Knoxville Symphony Orchestra. For the opening September concerts of the KSO's 2009-2010 Moxley Carmichael Masterworks series, we'll be presenting on the first half 3 works by American composers, the centerpiece of which will be the suite from the Reavers, music by the esteemed composer-conductor John Williams. As one of the best-known and admired composers in U.S. history, with a massive list of awards that includes over 41 Oscar nominations and 5 wins, John Williams is undoubtedly one of the most respected composers for cinema. Well, it's a distinct honor and privilege to be able to speak to Mr. Williams prior to our concerts, and I had the opportunity to have him on the phone. So, John, I want to welcome you to our podcast with our Knoxville Symphony audience.
Thanks very much, Lucas. It's delightful to speak to you. You know, we are old friends, and I haven't seen you, and it's been too long a time now. But I'm delighted about your appointment in Knoxville, and excited about, especially about this program that you've created.
Well, thank you. I don't know if you remember, but we actually first met in the mid-1980s when I was a conductor with the Young Musicians Foundation in Los Angeles. And you've always been extremely generous with your support of the YMF, and today we both serve on the Board of Trustees.
That's wonderful, and the 80s don't seem like such a long time ago to me, but I guess to some people they do. But it's been wonderful to follow your career, and to the extent that I know some of the things you've done, I've admired those, and I know you've done a lot of things that in the last few years that I haven't kept in touch with, particularly your tenure at Knoxville, which I would love to know more about. But this program that you're planning is just a delight, I think, and I want to thank you for thinking of me and including something of mine in it.
Well, I'll tell you, in 1987, I had the distinct honor of assisting you. You invited me to cover for a week of concerts that you were doing with the Houston Symphony. The program was made up of music that you had written for film and the concert hall, and one of the pieces was a suite from the 1969 film called The Reavers. And I remember that I fell in love with that score right away. Burgess Meredith had been the narrator in the original film, and he was the guest narrator for those live performances in Houston as well. I don't know if you remember, but I asked you over the years if it would be possible to make the suite available for other orchestras to play. And now I'm so delighted that, in fact, you have made it possible for the KSO to open our 74th season with it this September.
Well, as far as I know, Lucas, you will be the first one other than myself to conduct that music.
Is that right?
It was written for the film, as you've noted, in the late 60s. And I never had any notion or idea that it would be performed in public. But I did it a few times myself with Burgess Meredith, and it was a nice experience, and I enjoyed it. We, although never thought about publishing it or offering it to other conductors, no particular reason, not even any reticence. I just thought of it as yet another film score that one writes and then immediately puts in the drawer, and we never hear or see of it again. You know, this kind of fate has been the fate of so many, well, hundreds, probably thousands of film scores, and Reavers was really no different in my mind, with the possible exception of the fact that there was an LP of that score that kept the music a little bit more alive in my mind, I guess, and some of the others. I mean, but by the late 60s, it was not unique to have LPs of film scores.
Right.
But recordings always help offering a life beyond the film to the music, and in this case, I think it applied to some degree. I'm just delighted that you remembered it and that you would think to perform it. I'll be delighted to hear about how well it works for you and for your audience. I hope it'll be a great success and people will enjoy it.
Well, thank you. We actually have a wonderful narrator, Bill Williams, who's a local television figure here in Knoxville. Has just the right presence and voice to bring off the story. The story is originally by William Faulkner, and I wanted to know if you remembered incorporating any sort of specific folk tunes or anything into the score when you were writing it.
No, these are all original folk tunes, if I can put it that way. Just tunes that I fashioned in what was a very hurried period of putting the score together. So none of it's all original to the film, but it comes out of the great tradition of the folk tunes that we have
Well, there's a distinct American flavor to the score. I mean, and it has a lot of humor. I must add, in fact, the tuba seems to be a prominent player in the suite. Do you recall if there's a reason that the tuba has such a prominent part?
Well, what I remember is that the passage in the tuba had to do with the first trip of the car.
The Winton Flyer.
The Winton Flyer, which people will learn was the first car in town, and there was a beautifully described trip through the country by Faulkner that was filmed by Mark Rydell, the film director. And for probably obvious reasons, an old car looked like it sounded like a tuba to me, I think.
Uh-huh.
And so that was the association in my mind of the car chugging along and the tuba chugging alongside of it, creating some musical sounds that might be associated with the car. That Faulkner, the thing I've noted about Faulkner is that he was a high school dropout.
Oh.
Who won a Nobel Prize for literature. So I often say to some of my friends who have teenage children that might be troublesome, don't give up on the kids because they could turn out to be Nobel Prize winners. And his was an inspiring story, and I believe I'm right in saying that the Reavers, Faulkner was given a Pulitzer Prize for the Reavers. I think that's right. And it is what I did in making that suite. I think what I did, Lucas, was to put it together for the first concert that I did as a conductor of Boston Pops. That's when I put the cues from the film together. I call them cues. Your
right.
listeners will short musical segments. I'll put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I knew the story from the script of the film, but I got a copy of of Faulkner's novel and just extracted bits and pieces of dialogue that I hoped would sort of reconstruct the story which I knew I had, and inserted it in the musical score in the way that I did. And the words are 90 to 100% Faulkner.
Okay.
There may be a sentence or two from Irving and Harriet Ravitch, who were the screenwriters for the film.
Right.
But I distinctly remember just underlining and extracting right out of the novel what the speaker says. So it's close to me because it was close to the film and close to the spirit of Faulkner, who was one of those American writers that was lauded and accepted and appreciated all around the world. Some thoughtful writer has recently pointed out that our North American efforts in music and in architecture have never been able to rival what's been done in Europe. That's probably true. Our music, certainly our architecture, hasn't come to that level. But where we have been competitive, if not equal, is in the area of literature.
Absolutely.
American literature has been hugely successful when given worldwide international comparison. The greatest writers from Europe, South America, and elsewhere. And Faulkner is a particular treasure to us for all these reasons, and for his feeling about Mississippi and the time. And I just loved the film. As I think you mentioned, or I did, that Mark Rydell directed the film so beautifully, and it starred the late Steve McQueen, who embodied so many of these kind of characters of romantic, let's say 19th century Americanism that's so graphic, so beautifully depicted in the film. And of course we had Burgess of Buzz Meredith, as he's remembered, doing the narration, and he was without equal in this kind of, as a performer and used in the creation of this kind of atmosphere. It was a great experience, and I'm very grateful to you and to Knoxville for picking this up and doing it. I hope it works very well, and I'll just repeat that all involved will enjoy it. That would give me great pleasure to know that, and another reason to be grateful to you.
Oh, you're so kind. You're always so gracious, John, I must say, and a role model for so many people. I've seen you work under so many different conditions, and it's always a lesson to me about how one can achieve great things and still be kind, gracious, and maintain a level of humanity. And you are certainly a role model for all of us.
Well, I don't know if I can claim any of that, but thank you for the expression so much, Lucas. And I think I'm right in mentioning that I've heard at least that you'll couple the Reavers with Barber's Knoxville.
Right, the Knoxville Summer of 1915, which is also based on the writings of
That's right.
American author James Agee.
And I think that Barber's Knoxville is a genuine American masterpiece. I think I've performed it myself quite a few times with various singers. I know you have, and it's put together with such art and such interrelated care and craftsmanship. It's a treasure of a piece. And I just think your idea for a program of putting these two things together, Agee and Faulkner, is a stroke of genius.
Oh, thank you.
I just can't wait. When are the concerts, incidentally? When do they happen?
The concerts are going to take place on September 24th and 25th.
Oh, that's great. This is '09, of course.
Yes, just coming up
Fabulous.
This September.
Well, I wish I could be there, but I know it'll be. I know that Knoxville is going to be absolutely fabulous, and I can't wait to hear how Reavers can be received. I hope the musicians enjoy it too. You do need a good tubaist, and I'm sure you have one.
Yes, we do. We certainly do. Sam McMorrin is our principal tubist, and he's looking forward to playing your music.
I don't know whether he's played my tuba concerto, but maybe after Reavers he'll want to, or he won't want to.
I'm sure he's aware of it. In fact, I had the pleasure of conducting your tuba concerto with the Pittsburgh Symphony a few years ago.
Oh, great!
And I just loved it. One of my favorite moments is in the slow movement when you treat the tuba as another French horn.
Oh, if we have the quintet, I guess, of horns, yeah.
And it's just so warm and lush. Speaking of concert works, on that program in Houston, I became familiar with two other of your concert works. You did the Essay for Strings, the very powerful work, along with your violin concerto. I wanted to know what you feel about the difference between writing for film and composing for the concert hall.
Well, a short answer, Lucas, is that writing for the concert hall is, for me at least, much more difficult, for the simple reason that when one sits down to write a scene in a movie, there are a lot of parameters that are given. We know how long the scene is. We know where the music can be loud and where it can be soft. We have a pretty good idea of what the speed of the music should be. All of these are given and more or less required of us as a consequence of the scene and its dynamics. So you sit down with an empty page, but it's not really empty. We have an idea of the silhouette or the gestalt of what the music is going to be, needs to be. Whereas with a concert work, you sit down with a blank page, and the page is really blank.
There are no other parameters.
And there are no other parameters and no other guidelines other than one's own imagination. Or if it has to do with a literary context or whatever, there may be some allusions or references to subjects. But it's more challenging. Writing for concert hall, for me, probably for everyone, is more challenging for that and other reasons. But that's the simple one and the biggest reason.
Do you prefer one to the other?
Not really. It's in my musical life, Lucas. I think one has been the source of enrichment of the other, if not discouragement of the other. I always remember reading somewhere that the Greeks, when they sent their senators to Athens to serve the Senate, they required them to serve only 6 months. They had to go back to the farm and farm for the other 6 months, so that the one activity would be the source of nourishment for the other, which is a nice idea.
Mm-hmm.
Not get overloaded. In my case, I work on some films. In this context, I think it's maybe helpful to say that working in film is like journalistic work. I mean, you have deadlines. You know that today is Thursday, and next Tuesday I have to produce 10 minutes and have it on the stage. Good, bad, or indifferent. And there are deadlines that produce obviously pressure to get the work done.
Right.
In writing to the concert hall, usually we don't have that kind of pressure. So I do a few films, and then it's lovely to be able to compose a concert piece where I can just leisurely write 4 bars a day if I want to, or 40 bars a day if I want to. And there's no there's nothing compelling me to complete something before I want to complete it. So it's been a good way to relax, and then in another sense, writing concert music is a good way to sharpen my tools and my even techniques, so that when I go back to film work, it almost seems easier. It's a little bit like in baseball, swinging 2 bats, and then I go back to the film and I only really need one.
So it's a little lighter load in a way.
A little lighter load and a little less demanding in so many ways.
Well, now you've been conducting your works for your whole musical life. I wanted to know, in your experience conducting the Boston Pops, for instance, you were there 1980 to 1993 and conducted many of your works and many works by other composers. Has conducting influenced your choices as a composer?
Probably so. I think I imagine everything we do in music has some interaction and interconnection with other things that we do. I always felt that playing music was very important. I used to play a lot of chamber music with colleagues here, that many that you knew, Ed Lustgarten and Israel Baker and others, and there's so much wonderful repertoire in chamber playing. I also feel that as a composer, one learns so much from performing, either conducting or playing. I always think that composers who don't conduct miss something, even if they don't conduct well or professionally. The act of bringing music off the page and realizing it teaches us so much about balance and so much about orchestration and the psychology of not only the music, but the psychology of the interaction of the people, the community that has to be brought together by the conductor to bring the piece, make the piece come off. It changes your writing. It's very instructive. And likewise, I think that conductors who only conduct miss something. That if they write, they understand composers better when they get on the podium to interpret their works. I think for all of us as musicians, we need to sing, play, write, orchestrate, do everything we can do to make music and help each other make music and learn from one another. So I think it's the more we can connect all the pieces and the dots, the more we hopefully will be able to contribute to music.
Now, in the film, the character portrayed by Steve McQueen, Boone Hagenbeck, is that right? He says, sometimes you have to say goodbye to the things you know and hello to the things you don't.
Right.
I thought this was kind of fitting to ask you, as you're getting started on a new score, do you find yourself in this very situation where you've got to go out on a limb and try new things and leave behind, say, your comfort zone?
I guess it's the process of describes the nature of adventure itself. It describes the nature of exploration, of all kinds of exploration, artistic, geographic, spatial, and all of it. What it maybe doesn't include is that it's not possible ever for us to leave behind the things we know. We're shaped by those things, and that shape allows us to, or inhibits us from moving on to the things that we don't know, or trying to develop the things that we don't know. But there is a connection, and as we step forward in all of our things, we don't break our links with the past, but we try to move forward and find new directions in every discipline with full, or as much knowledge, base knowledge as we can get of history and common practices, performance practices, and other things. I think it's an adventurous statement and a good one. And it urges us to not be stuck in the mud, so to speak. There is mud on the road to Memphis, incidentally, in the car ride, and the Reavers, very muddy scene. But it gets us out of the mud and gets us moving forward.
Well, it strikes me that in so many of your scores, you create a whole universe of sound. Like one of my favorite scores is Catch Me If You Can. It's so distinct in the genre and the brilliant jazz, very difficult score for the saxophone alone, but your voice as a composer comes through very clearly. It's still very much John Williams. Well,
thank you, Lucas. That was a lot of fun to do. Every film that we do presents a challenge. In this sense, when I look at a film that doesn't have any music, I say to myself, what should the film sound like? What noise should this film make that no other film makes? Noise being music, sound, whatever. themes, color of orchestra, and so on. It's not always possible to uncover a new universe with every film, and each film offers a different kind of opportunity and presents limits or puts limits on where we can go musically and where we really can't. The thing about Catch Me If You Can was that it presented a good opportunity to do something a little bit goofy, and a little unexpected maybe, and because it was set in, I believe I'm right in saying the 60s,
right.
And one piece of music that it did have in the film when I saw it was a recording of Frank Sinatra singing "Come Fly With Me," I think, with a wonderful arrangement of Billy May, which we both knew and remember well.
Mm-hmm.
So it suggested to me, 60s, what kind of 60s jazz? So it took me in that direction, the film itself, and back to a period when I remembered people like Bud Shank and Art Pepper and, of course, Charlie Parker, and the great players we had at that time. And I thought if I could write a kind of little two-part invention for string bass and alto where every note was written, that you had a proper two-strand counterpoint exercise for these two.
Mm-hmm.
Makes it very difficult for both of them. We had fabulous players on the soundtrack recording, and then accompany that, if you like, two-part contrapuntal exercise with relatively small orchestral forces. And Steven Spielberg animated the opening of the film to this goofy little piece of music.
Right.
So the combination of these things created something that was not only nostalgic for the 60s, but hopefully fresh for the period of time that the film was released. And I mean, basically, that's the sort of genesis of, and I should also mention that we're so fortunate here in Southern California, we were able to use our great saxophonist, Dan Higgins.
Now, you mentioned that Steven Spielberg animated the opening portion of the film to your music. Most people don't realize that the addition of music to a film is one of the last and most critical parts of a film's creation. Generally, one's required to compose a score after the footage has been shot and edited, but composers are rarely given the luxury of more than, say, 3 or 4 weeks within which to write, say, over an hour's worth of music. First, I wanted to know if you happen to recall how much time you might have had for the Reavers, and secondly, have there been times when you've been able to craft the score over a longer period of time?
I remember distinctly the Reavers taking 1 month.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I know that is because I was working on another project, and a musical, and I was able to find 4 weeks that I could take off from the musical from MGM and go to do this film for Mark Rydell. So it was done, for me at least, very quickly. I can't tell you how many minutes of music there would be in the Reavers, probably about an hour, I think.
Right.
Then the opposite of that, I remember working on the film Superman, the first one, with Christopher Reeve, which was no longer than the usual film. It probably had more music. It's probably got 90 minutes, maybe up to close to 2 hours of music.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember working on that film for about 6 months for one reason or another.
Oh.
I think the reason probably was that in that, I think it was about in late 1970s, there was so much difficulty in flying Chris Reeve, the flying sequences. I don't think the computerization, special effects, sophisticated capacities that we have today were quite as developed then. And I'm just assuming that the reason that took so long was because of the special effects being done more slowly than they are today. Of course, musicals, things like Fiddler on the Roof, for example, I worked on that for 1.5 years.
Right.
But
you won your first Oscar for that.
That's right, and that's the case of musical, at least the way it was done in those years. I mean, we had to audition singers, I had to play the piano for rehearsals, and then orchestrate or reorchestrate and adapt the music and record everything, even the dances, all before it was filmed. And then all the weeks of filming all this musical material, if there needed to be any changes, I'd have to reorchestrate 8 bars and fit that in so that Norman Jewison could match the visuals to the music. That would be a whole other conversation that we could have with Lucas. But the way musicals were done then took many, many months to do. But the average film that you and I are talking about today, and that you mentioned earlier, that the composer's given 4 to 6 weeks, that's the average and the common practice these days. As difficult as it is, I think the reason for these very, very short post-production periods probably has to do with, initially money, I would imagine, but also the fact that because of all the computerization and Pro Tools and Avids and machinery that your listeners may not be familiar with, but this is equipment that makes editing and all the processes of mixing sounds and music and so on. It makes it possible to do these things much more quickly. I think all of this technology that's been advanced in areas like editing. The effect of the technology on the composing part of the process has been to add pressure on the composer to produce his work more quickly. We don't get more time these days. We seem to get less.
Which already in a very short schedule is
tough.
Yeah.
In 2 words, money and technology are probably the two reasons for that.
Now, I have to ask a question because the story is out there that when you were working on films like Star Wars, because of your collaboration with directors like Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, the partnership had grown so comfortable that, in fact, you would write sequences of music first, and then they would edit their action to your music. Is that true?
Well, that happens very rarely, Lucas. What has happened a few times is that I've performed some music to the film in the way that it was prepared, and either had difficulty making it fit or putting it in sync, as we would say, making the synchronization exactly matching the film. And on certain occasions, both Steven Spielberg and George Lucas have said to me, "Well, just play the music phrase the music the way the orchestra would freely want to play it, and I'll adjust the cutting of the film to fit the music." And that's happened a few times in our career, and every time that the result of that has always been a more unified, homogenized result, I think. The most conspicuous example that I remember is the last 8 or 10 minutes of E.T., with all the flying and the dialogue of the boys and the bicycle chase and so on, that people may remember if they've seen the film. That the film was slightly adjusted from cut to cut. Not dramatically, but just slightly, just so that it matched the natural phrasing and breathing and rhythm of the music. And it helped the music, but I think it also helped the film to have a strong rooted marriage emotionally between sound effects, the dialogue, and the music. A stronger rooting, I think, than we would have had if the music was in its customary way, slavishly following point to point on the screen.
Well, and it takes a director who acknowledges and appreciates and understands the power of the music,
right,
and to be able to accommodate that and be willing to accommodate it. In fact,
right. Well, I think when it's right to do, I think it helps all concerned. I mean, I can't struggle for an analogy quickly, but it may be something like ballet, where the conductor may be slavishly following the dancers, which is good. But what's better is if the dancers actually agree about the tempi, and then the dancers dance to the music.
Sure.
You get an organic join that doesn't quite work the other way as well.
Right.
It may be an analogy.
Although I've seen you conduct live performances with an orchestra where you bring the orchestra in sync with the film so that the audience can view the older film and hear you conduct. And I was just amazed. I remember the sequence of Seven Brides for Seven Brothers where they're jumping over logs or something. There's a whole dance sequence, and you hit every single one of those.
Well, it takes some practice and a little luck too. I mean, that's a very difficult sequence, that particular one, and it's fairly long. It's 6 or 7 minutes, and of course you can get very far off in 6 or 7 minutes. There's a lot of room to wander. But with a great orchestra and with enough practice, it's possible to keep those things pretty tight. It's difficult for the conductor to do that, and I think it's even more difficult for the orchestra. It's a different kind of discipline, as you know, as a conductor. And a lot of what we do as conductors is establish a kind of kinetic or a certain energy, and then allow it to flow. No tempo is really particularly steady, like as we would with a metronome. orchestra would be challenged to play with a metronome or a click track. It's not easy. You take the click track away, but then we have to perform with that same disciplined regularity. It's an unmusical thing. I don't know how to describe that to listeners or readers particularly well, but it's you need an orchestra that's attentive to the conductor, not every 4 bars or 8 bars, but every bar.
Right.
So that after 4 measures of fast music, we're not too soon to the 5th measure or too late to it. If you're too late to it, you never can catch up. So,
well, I guess the fact that the film runs at a rate of 24 frames per second,
right.
And if you were out by 2 frames, a 12th of a second, it would feel out of sync.
Yeah, the eye can see it.
Right.
And amazingly so, not to be too technical, but each one of those frames has 4 sprocket holes.
Right.
And if for example, a chorus is out of sync with the orchestra by as little as 2 sprocket holes, you can hear it. So it has to be so precise in order to sound natural and right. And when we get it right, people won't even notice it, But the possibilities for error are there, and they need to be dealt with and solved. It takes a lot of practice and a lot of experience doing it. And I sometimes talk about it as it's like riding horses. If you become expert at it, you don't feel the bumps.
Well, I have to thank you for so many of my colleagues in the conducting field for having made your music available in the John Williams Signature Series. The fact that we're able to perform your music on concerts throughout the year, July 4th concerts, and as we're opening our season, it's so great to have you oversee your music that we know and love. And I just wanted to thank you on behalf of me and my colleagues.
Well, that's been a labor of love for me, and it's been also an opportunity for me to try to ensure that the music that goes out to people is articulated in the right way, and you and I would say bowed and the rest of it. In other words, the preparation of it is such that it's prepared as well as it can be, and then the next step is to put it into a fine conductor's hands and take it to the orchestra. So. Yeah, it's and the other thing is that although this is an opportunity really to have the music go to people, it's not it isn't really a business opportunity. It may seem to be to people. It's very expensive to do these things, and if we break even with it, it's fine. The whole point of it is to disseminate the music and have it available for schools and orchestras to see and to play and hopefully enjoy not only my music but music of others. Whenever publications are well done, we're grateful for it, and it engenders performances and helps contribute to music. That is the whole thinking behind it, and it pleases me greatly that a conductor such as yourself would ever want to play any of my music anyway. You honor me in doing it, Lucas.
Well,
and then I feel a little sense of security, knowing that at least as a starting point, you're going to have an edition that at least has the right notes in it.
Yeah.
Put it that way.
Because what so often happens with film scores is that you record it and notes were changed, and then it goes into a vault and maybe never sees the light of day again.
Well, it's true, and a lot of people listening to this who outside the music business will not understand that so much music that's rented and sold is not accurately edited.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even very recently, I shouldn't mention names or publishers, but one of the greatest names in German music in publications that are world famous do have mistakes, and the music is 125 years old and corrected by other editions and so on. So from edition to edition, as you know, as a music director, when you're selecting what to put in front of your orchestra, not every edition of these things is as good as the next one. And there are glaring errors in some of the most famous pieces of music still going around. And rental libraries send a lot of marked up materials to our orchestras that are missing parts and missing pages and all of the rest of this. So not to burden your listeners with the difficulties that we in our libraries have to deal with, but it's great when we can get music distributed and have people enjoy it and players and listeners use it. That's the purpose of all of this, sharing music, and brings us together, even though we can't physically be in the same place. Um, it's a way of bonding, of joining with our brothers and sisters around the world in music.
And we are so honored that for our opening concerts, you have decided to add the Suite from the Reavers to the John Williams Signature Series. We're very honored to be the first. I'm so honored to be the first conductor to conduct it besides you.
You will be, absolutely. And when the news came to me that you were doing it, I was thrilled about that. And first I thought, my God, how would he know about that? And then, of course, I know your background from being Californian, that we've known each other, so it probably does follow that you might have known it. I'm grateful to you, Lucas, and delighted about it. And as I said at the outset of our chat here, I hope you have a great success with it and great joy with it.
Thank you. And John, I don't know if you've ever made your way to Knoxville, but we'd love to have you here sometime. We've got a great city and a great orchestra. We'd love to see you on our podium at some point.
Well, actually, I've never been to Knoxville, and that great part of the country is unknown to me. We'll hope that the gods are good to us and the time may be available and the opportunity may come, and I'd love a visit. Thanks for the thought, and if we can ever put it together, it would be my great joy.
That'd be terrific.
Well, look, Lucas, thanks again, and please give my warm greetings to the orchestra. Say hello to them from me. Some of them I must know from Tanglewood or wherever.
Oh, sure.
And I'd love to see them and tell them thank you for doing this, and I wish I could be with them.
I will extend that to them. And John, thank you again for taking all this time to talk with us about the Reavers and your musical life and everything that is so meaningful to you in music. You touch our hearts and you touch our souls with your graciousness and your beautiful music.
Thank you so much, Lucas.